Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're doing something a bit different, a final reflection, really. We're looking back at a major European project, B-Trust, which wasn't just about studying distrust in science, but actually trying to build trust right into how innovation happens.
That's right. B-Trust was this big EU Horizon Europe-funded project running 2021 to 2027. Significant budget, too, about 1.5 million, coordinated by Flanders Food. And it tackled, well, a fundamental challenge that biotechnology has incredible potential, for food, health, sustainability. But it keeps hitting this wall.
And that wall isn't usually the science itself, is it? It's about public acceptance, low adoption, industries holding back, politicians maybe not incentivized enough. It often comes down to distrust and misinformation.
Precisely. So B-Trust didn't just want to write another report about distrust. The goal was ambitious. Yeah. Develop a transparent, inclusive governance model. Basically figure out how we can introduce and manage biotech innovations, especially in food and bio-based sectors, in a way that builds, rather than erodes, public confidence.
And the key word there seems to be inclusive. It wasn't just experts deciding.
No, absolutely not. The core idea was promoting co-creation, bringing everyone to the table, citizens, consumers, farmers, researchers, businesses, public authorities. Yeah. Getting them involved together.
You mentioned this ties into bigger policy goals, too.
Definitely. This isn't just academic. By finding ways to govern that build trust, B-Trust is directly aiming to support huge EU initiatives like the bioeconomy strategy and the European Green Deal. It's about making sure Europe can actually use these innovations to become more sustainable and, well, innovation-friendly. So co-creation becomes this strategic tool.
Okay, let's dive into the first really big lesson that came out of this. Facilitators like Veerle Rijckaert from Alice Down the Rabbit Hole stress that trust isn't something you can engineer or bolt on at the end. It has to be co-created. What does that actually mean for, say, a typical research team?
It's a huge mindset shift, a really profound one. It means listening first. Before you've even finalized your research question, maybe. You're not just bringing people in at the end to get a thumbs up on your finished product.
Right, not just validation.
Yeah, exactly. You involve them right from the start, from the concept stage, to actually shape the solutions together. It changes the dynamic completely. Citizens aren't just passive recipients anymore, they're active partners.
That sounds, well, complicated, and probably quite slow compared to traditional R&D. How did B-Trust structure this to make sure it was genuine dialogue, not just ticking a box?
They used a phased approach. First was context mapping. And this wasn't just, a quick online poll. It was about deeply understanding existing beliefs, the emotions involved, where the knowledge gaps really were, asking how people felt, and crucially, why.
Okay, understanding the landscape first.
Yes. And then came the multi-stakeholder workshops. The key here was creating a space where citizens, farmers, scientists, industry folks could genuinely interact as equals, breaking down those hierarchies.
But how do you get past the polite conversation, the usual positions people take? How do they get to the real, sometimes difficult stuff?
They use some quite creative techniques. Things like role-playing scenarios, which can really help people see things from another perspective, and also something they called prototypes.
Prototypes, provocative prototypes.
Exactly. These weren't necessarily finished products. Often they were challenging concepts or ethical dilemmas presented in a tangible way. Maybe a mock-up showing how a new technology might shift power, or a scenario that forced people to grapple with trade-offs, like between food production efficiency and environmental impact.
So deliberately creating a bit of friction to spark a necessary conversation before it's too late.
Yes, precisely. Because the fundamental insight is that trust doesn't just come from bombarding people with facts and data. It starts with human connection, with honesty, with feeling respected. And it's about making those often hidden, invisible concerns actually visible and discussable.
And when they did that, when they surfaced these hidden concerns, what were they usually about? Was it the technical detail, the science itself?
Often, no. Surprisingly, perhaps. When you really dug down, the hesitation wasn't usually about the specific gene editing technique or the fermentation process. It was much more about fairness, about power dynamics, about who benefits and who gets to decide.
That feeling of things being done to you rather than with you.
Exactly that. If people feel excluded from the decisions that affect them, distrust is almost the default response, no matter how brilliant the science might seem on paper.
Okay, but hold on. Sofía Ross, the project manager from FOOD+i cluster, flagged this as a real challenge. If co-creation is this deep, this involved, needing flexibility, it sounds like it could be, well, slow and messy. In a world where biotech innovation moves fast, how do you justify that apparent trade-off?
That's the million-euro coin, isn't it? And it is a tension. You definitely sacrifice some short-term speed. But the argument B-Trust makes, and what the experience showed, is that you're trading that speed for long-term resilience and acceptance.
Avoiding a bigger failure later on.
Right. What's the point of racing ahead to develop a technically perfect solution if society ultimately rejects it because the trust wasn't built?
Yeah.
That upfront, messy work, that deep listening, it becomes a critical investment. It ensures the innovation is socially robust, not just technically sound.
That point about distrusting the system more than the science feels like a really crucial insight. So if it's systemic, what did the project learn about the psychology of acceptance? What actually drives people to embrace or reject these technologies? Charlotte Boone's work shed light on this, right?
Yes, her insights were key here. The central finding really reinforced that point. People's main anxieties are often about transparency, about the ethics, about accountability, and critically, about who stands to gain. It's less, is this science safe? And more, can I trust the people and institutions behind this science?
So it's not the innovation, it's the innovator or the system controlling it. What were the key factors that seemed essential for acceptance, according to the B-Trust findings?
They identified three main pillars, if you like. First, alignment with personal values. Does this biotechnology actually address a problem that people care about personally? Things like climate change, food waste, animal welfare issues with broad societal relevance. These resonate much more strongly than, say, innovations perceived primarily to cut corporate costs.
So the why behind the innovation is paramount, purpose over just efficiency. What's number two?
Second is clarity of communication. And this isn't about slick PR or marketing spin. It's about radical honesty, transparency, even humility. Openly talking about the uncertainties, the trade-offs, the things we don't know yet, showing you understand the complexities.
And the third pillar brings it back to the actors involved.
Exactly. The third factor is trust in the actor. Ultimately, acceptance hinges heavily on whether people perceive the organization or researcher proposing the innovation as ethical, accountable, and acting in the public interest. It's fundamentally relational. You trust the source before you trust the information.
And this relational trust wasn't uniform across Europe, was it? Did they find differences between countries?
They did, yeah. Which really highlights why a one-size-fits-all approach just doesn't work. For instance, in Denmark, there seemed to be a generally higher baseline trust in government and regulatory bodies. People felt perhaps more protected. Whereas in Belgium, there was noticeably more skepticism, especially around large corporations and profit motives. So your strategy for building trust needs to be sensitive to that local context. Maybe you need to focus more on demonstrating corporate accountability in one place and regulatory oversight in another.
You also mentioned something fascinating, the honesty paradox, that trying to present a perfect, risk-free picture can actually backfire.
Yes, this was a really powerful finding. People aren't naive. They know science involves unknowns and trade-offs. The B-Trust workshops consistently found that when researchers were upfront about limitations, about potential downsides, but what wasn't fully understood yet, they actually gained trust.
Rather than losing it.
Right. Trying to paint a picture of absolute certainty just makes people suspicious. It makes them wonder what you're not saying. Honesty about complexity builds credibility.
So the biggest mistake is thinking that just presenting the data, however strong, is enough. What people really crave is that openness, that inclusion, which also explains why the language we use is so critical. Words like natural or safe or even innovation can mean very different things to different ears.
Absolutely. And that's another strength of co-creation. It forces you to confront those different interpretations early on. It helps build a shared language that's actually meaningful to everyone involved because you've worked through the assumptions of values hidden beneath the surface.
Okay, so you do this deep listening, this context mapping, you understand the values and concerns. How does that then feed back into actually changing the innovation itself? How do you get from engagement to actual co-design?
That's the crucial next step, moving from insight to action. Helene Imschut from Flanders Food talked a lot about this. Co-design meant actively taking those social insights, those complex feelings and values, and embedding them right into the innovation pathway. So technical feasibility was considered alongside and equally weighted with what you might call its social feasibility or social grounding.
And were there specific tools they used to help innovators bridge that gap? It sounds like translating qualitative insights into technical specs could be tricky.
It is tricky, yeah. So they adapted existing innovation tools and created new ones. Things like stakeholder maps, but perhaps more detailed on power dynamics. Value proposition canvases, but expanded beyond just the customer to include societal value and ethical considerations. Impact narratives that helped innovators really think through and articulate the potential social consequences, positive and negative.
So forcing the R&D teams to visualize how their tech lands in the real world beyond the lab.
Exactly. And to understand the kind of social contract they were implicitly asking society to accept, it forces a consideration of ethics and perception right from the design stage.
That sounds like it requires a fundamental cultural shift within research institutions or companies, moving away from just announcing a finished product.
To engaging right at the beginning, yes. That was maybe the biggest mindset shift identified. Moving from communication at the end, basically marketing, to genuine engagement at the start. It reframes innovation as something done with society, not just for society. It implies shared ownership, shared responsibility.
And Sofía Rose also mentioned the need for flexibility and how you facilitate this, because different people engage differently. Some need stories, others need data.
Absolutely. Good facilitation had to adapt. Some stakeholders respond best to narrative and personal stories to build connection, while others need the hard data, the regulatory details, the risk assessments. A successful co-creation process makes space for both.
It really comes back to those core threads, doesn't it? As Sofía put it. Trust is relational, engagement has to be early, and yes, co-creation might be slower and messier up front, but it's ultimately what leads to genuinely transformative and accepted innovation, the kind needed for big goals like the Green Deal.
That really sums it up. The whole ambition of B-Trust was to help unlock biotechnology's potential by finding this better way, this trust-based governance model, to support that sustainable, inclusive bioeconomy for Europe.
And I suppose the core message, wrapping up this whole series really, is that achieving that kind of systemic change demands a good dose of humility from innovators and institutions. It requires real listening and, maybe crucially, a willingness to genuinely share power, treating the social side not as an afterthought, but as fundamental design criteria. So here's a final thought for you, our listeners, to take away. If you're involved in innovation, in bringing new science or technology into the world, are you truly investing the time and resources needed for that deep co-creation? The messy mapping, the difficult dialogues, the shared design? Or are you perhaps still focused on crafting the perfect message at the end, hoping to overcome a distrust you might have inadvertently helped create?
It's a challenging question, and for anyone wanting to explore these ideas further, the B-Trust Forum website has recordings of all the masterclasses that fed into these lessons learned. It's a valuable resource.
Indeed. Well, that brings us to the end of this deep dive and this series on the B-Trust project. The final advice echoes throughout the project's findings. Listen early, co-create often, and trust the process. Thanks for joining us.